I believe there was a recommendation from staff and council that the board take an action item coming out of executive session related to Colorado River Cooperative Agreement implementation matters. And that would be a recommendation that the board authorize the extension of the existing agreement with Harvey Economics for a period of 1 year and an additional $20,000 of funding, all subject to the appropriations and expenditures made under the West Slope Common Interest Cost Share Agreement related to Colorado River Cooperative Agreement implementation.
I will move staff's recommendation.
Second. Motion Whitmore, second Rampy. Staff's recommendation. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same.
Thank you. On the public report, there is one proposed action item, and that is on page 5 of your public general counsel report if you printed one out, or you can just hit the handy dandy tab on your iPad if you're following along that way. And that is that in April, the board authorized a 1-year lease of the River District's supply of Rudai Reservoir water up to 3,500 acre-feet, I believe, to the CWCB for in-channel purposes, pursuant to your policy on in-channel uses. And now, in working through that contract process with the Water Conservation Board, they would very much like to use their standard form contract. We have a standard form contract as well. We believe we have more flexibility to use their standard form contract than they do ours. And therefore, just ask for your delegation and authority to us to use the CWCB standard form contract, subject to relatively minor amendments that we would need to make as approved by general counsel and executed by the general manager.
So moved.
Second. Motion Merritt, second Vandenbrink. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same.
Next item on the in the general counsel report and on the agenda for discussion is a mid-year review of general counsel's goals and objectives. This is an iteration with brief status update on the goals and objectives that we discussed with, or I discussed with you in October of last year and January of this year. I think that everything in there should be relatively self-explanatory. I'm happy to entertain questions. One thing I would point out was I did suggest the addition of, since I'm spending a fair amount of time on that, resolution of the pending Colorado Springs diligence application. We've talked about that case previously, but since it is taking both some of my time and Jason's time, as well as John's as well, that we could put that on the list if you so desire. If not, that's fine as well.
Questions or discussion?
With item 6, with working with more with Division 6, has there been more with that since?
There has not on the administrative issues. Well, there's been some feedback from both the state engineer and the Division 6 engineer. I need to provide a feedback to the water users, and based on what I've heard back, what I heard back was positive from them. You know, a lot of the right words and things in terms of implementable steps. We haven't come to any suggestions or proposals on that yet. But I will get back with them and get back with the board in October about the next steps on that, to the extent there are. I think there was a pretty good agreement that an annual meeting, at a minimum, would be a good idea to keep those lines of communication open, build on the communication. As you remember from that meeting, it took a while to get to the tough issues, but once we did, people were talking, and hopefully we can build on that and get to those types of issues more quickly the next time around.
Okay.
But there was strong support from both the state and division engineer to meet on an annual basis.
And
We did receive just Friday afternoon, a proposed revision from the state on the so-called stock watering versus pre-existing issue, in-stream flows versus pre-existing stock watering issues. That was the morning meeting of a meeting that we had with the state division engineers that day. The proposed changes are a little troubling. There is one that, in my perspective, is not acceptable, and that is that their proposal would still leave the Water Conservation Board with an up or no vote, up or no roll, yay or nay, on as to whether an alleged pre-existing use was in fact pre-existing and therefore subject to benefit from the statutory deferment to pre-existing uses that's built into the statute for in-stream flows. And I don't read that in the statute anywhere, and so we're going to push back on that. We just haven't done it yet since it came in late on Friday. Is that what you were referring to?
no, I was actually just going to say, along the lines of Division 6, our division engineer report tomorrow morning is actually going to be Aaron Light from Division 6. So anybody who has questions or concerns about how things are being administered up there, feel free to have those questions ready.
Other questions or comments for Peter? What's the board's pleasure on adding the Colorado Springs diligence as a list, add that to the list of goals and objectives? Agreement with that?
Since he's working on it, might as well add it.
Seems to be pretty well.
We can discount his time.
Well, we've done a lot of other things that aren't expressed in the list.
Yeah,
It's just that it's I wouldn't say it's taken a ton of time, but it will take more time in the future.
Yeah.
Whether it's resolved or not,
Yeah.
it's going to demand more time. Thank you.
Okay.
And I don't have anything further unless there are questions about anything else in the general counsel report.
I just have one. On the item 3, the strategic water rights development plan. And again, so are we going to have some type of a game plan? And I still want to see a list of the water rights that we have.
Well, we should have had that, or we did have that in
April. We had.
Yeah, we did have that in April. There was a presentation by John and I believe Hunter on the River District's existing conditional water rights, staff recommendations on those, some of which.
So I remember that conversation, but that's all the water rights that we have, conditional water rights? Or those were the ones that were coming up?
Well, those are the ones that are up for diligence in the next year to 2 years.
And that's what I'm, sometime, it would be nice to see the inventory and the portfolio, as you could see.
We can easily provide an inventory of all of the conditional water rights. I would say that the other conditional water rights that are not included in that report are more in the nature of second fill water rights or power rights for existing structures, and just the power component hasn't been developed. There may be one or two other substantive projects, but that was the.
Okay, well that's fine then too. I didn't realize that was the case. I
remember we got rid of a lot of them.
Well, and I knew that too. And
there's also a list of them in the IGA with Aurora.
that was part of your packet.
That's all of it. It was,
Did 5.
Oh, did five, you did, yeah.
Division 5.
The Division 6 ones aren't in there, but we did discuss all of those last month.
okay, thank you.
I have one question on Route I. If we had a request or any discussion at all from CWCB on additional flows out of Route I this summer because of extreme low flows?
I don't know, but I would imagine that the contract that we just talked about will be used this it's winter.
That's a winter contract.
No, we haven't.
I know, we've had potential for fishing suspension on both the frying pan and on the roaring fork because of the high temperatures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Water has leased
They've leased them, yeah.
their water, but they have not shown any interest in our water.
Okay.
You've reminded me of something that I need to talk with John about with respect to fill of Route I, which didn't fill. So we'll do that later.
So I think that brings us to general manager's report.
Right, and I think where Peter left off, and I'll pick up on my general manager goals and objectives that we reviewed and the board approved in January. My updates are in there, and I try to be fairly thorough and upfront about which ones I've been focusing on and where my efforts have been designed. But I would say, I'm not going to go through them all, but if anyone has questions about specific goals and objectives that I'm either working on or appear not to be working on, I welcome your input and questions.
Yeah, we had a discussion at one point about maybe a brief weekly or bi-weekly update to the board, quick memo as to activities going on, and wondering what the...
I think you're right, we did it. It was you and I and Tom, and we talked about maybe a monthly update.
Okay, yeah.
I think a weekly.
Oh, wait, good, a daily, we're looking for a daily update. Give us a call on,
If the board's interested, I'd certainly be interested in giving you a monthly update and let you know what's going on. And if need be, if there are other things that are moving quickly, I'd be happy to update it more. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think just on a periodic communication, since we do really only meet quarterly, and kind of good to keep up to date with what's going on.
Yep, I would agree.
Thank you.
I would say the one thing I guess I would mention in there is and Dave, you're part of why maybe I haven't updated. I feel like I get to see you a lot. Part of that is our State of the River meetings. We had 11 of them this past spring. I committed to and did actually speak at all 11 of them. Got to see Dave at 2 of them. And so many of you at them throughout the basin, and I appreciate that. I would say that additionally, I have met with 10 of the 15 boards of county commissions. I was talking with 3 of you, will be in Saguache later in August with Peter and I right after we visit the Southwest. So I'm going to keep knocking that off, and the External Affairs Department has been great in their assistance in making sure I do that. So if there are anything that you all are hearing from your county commissions in terms of additional things we can be doing, I'm always, my phone's always open, and email, love to talk to you about it, make sure we're covering it. I want to talk about the strategic plan update. As previously discussed, I think at our April meeting, it appears to staff that the important item of asset management was not thoroughly addressed in the strategic plan, maybe because it was assumed that we would manage our assets correctly by the board. But I think that I will tell you that asset management, both enterprise assets and our own assets here, office here, do require constant attention by employees and quite a bit of our time. And I want to suggest that be made a strategic plan initiative so that those employees whose time is being devoted to that feel like they're actually contributing to the mission of the district. For a lot of reasons, it's important that we operate and maintain our assets in a proper manner. My recommendation is in my memo. I welcome questions, but there's a motion to approve that amendment there.
Discussion, questions?
I had a question about a different topic.
Just a minute, let's, so.
So you need a motion then to add
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
So I guess I'll make the motion. I think it was a given. We had assumed it's the most important part that you have is what you already have. And so, yeah, I would move that we add that to our strategic plan.
Second.
Motion Munger, second Aqua Fresca. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed, same. Thank you. So that's officially added to the strategic plan. Now, Director Aqua Fresca.
Thank you. Andy, in your printed report at the top of page 4, I didn't understand item C, work with local communities within district to assist in the development of climate mitigation plans related to firm water supply.
Right. The question is that helping local communities within our district assess whether or not changing hydrology potentially as a result of climate change, as identified in the strategic plan by the board, would actually pose a threat to some of their local water supplies, and how they could firm that up in times of changing.
Makes sense, but I'd have to agree with Director Aqua Fresca. It's not entirely clear. It sounds as if the communities are supposed to mitigate climate change somehow.
I thought maybe you were going to help me promote cloud seeding.
Happy to do that.
Yeah. I think it's more the response to when it is. You're mitigating your water supply as opposed to mitigating climate. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that, the black part of that where you have the question is actually in my goals and objectives that we discussed in January. So perhaps it wasn't clear at the time. Thank you. Next item on my general manager's report is just a brief one in that, as I think discussed with the board when I was hired, the question is how do we have an endless supply of requests for assistance here at the district. We also have a very creative staff who are out in the field talking to people and constantly coming up with different ways we can help. And we don't have internally a very systematic method of evaluating new projects or new requests for assistance. And they can vary from something that takes a couple hours to something that's going to have us involved for 20 or 30 years. And the question is, how do we do that in a systematic way so that we make sure that when we agree to assist others or to launch a new initiative or a new project, that we're actually consistent with our mission, consistent with our strategic plan, consistent with our policies, that we're acting in a way that is not controversial not unintentionally acting in a way that is not controversial, that within our basins, and that we understand up front as best as we can what the human resource requirements are going to be for any particular project or what the financial resource requirements may be. So with the assistance of the department heads, I've come up with a rubric, for lack of a better word, where we will basically put these requests for assistance through a process. And the smaller it is, the less process it is. There are thresholds that would kick it into a full department head and general manager review, and the highest level being the full board reviewing something that we would need to, before we could commit to being involved in. And it's not going to be an exact science. It still is going to have subjectivity, but we really do get hit with a variety of requests. And I would say that it's important now. We have limited resources today. It may unfortunately become much more important if we are unable to avoid the hit that we're going to take if the residential rate assessment issue in the Gallagher Amendment is not addressed either by our district or at a statewide level. And so when we're looking at a potential 15% cut to our general fund, the idea of having limited resources and being able to direct those to the areas where there's the most impact is something I want to be able to do. And I think it helps our staff understand where we're headed with new projects. I was, in my memo, I said I would take a request and walk you through the rubric, honestly, in the interest of making sure that we have enough time to get to the 4 o'clock close that Lori has threatened Tom's life if we don't.
Power goes off, don't worry.
4 o'clock. So I'm not going to do that, but I do want to just give you the heads up that I wanted to do it because it's something called the AMPA Water Fund. And it's being suggested or requested of us by one of the parties behind it, which is the Nature Conservancy, that our district take on a role as a project manager on a fund that would have NGO money or private money coming into a fund that would assist the basin in implementing its basin implementation plan. There are a lot of reasons to look at it. There are a lot of reasons to say yes. There are a lot of reasons that are raise some red flags. And I think this rubric will actually help identify that. I can assure you, let me say this is the kind of project, because it's, as far as I can tell, endless, which under my leadership, our board will, or our staff will not engage in unless we come to you and get your approval and consent. So I wanted to walk through it. I'm not going to do that here, but if anybody's interested in how that rubric works a little closer, I'm happy to send you the current draft. We're putting together some flow chart and all of that stuff, so it's fairly easy to understand. But I just want you to understand that was something, honestly, going back to when I was interviewed, that I heard emphasized by you in terms of making sure we had some direction in where we were going with the staff project. So that's what we're doing.
I would like to see that if I could.
Yep.
We'll get it.
Yeah.
Well, I'll send it out to everybody.
The water,
We'll finish up the flow charts.
The Water Fund Subcommittee did not make the request to you. TNC did.
Correct.
And TNC has been helping us being the facilitator of the local community. So, yeah, I think they're trying to pass the buck on us. Nicely said. So, anyhow, whether that's the right thing or to do for us or not to do, it still needs to be locally driven by our Yampa River people. Tom's included as well as others as well. So,
I'd like to see what you got.
What we got from them or from?
No, what your rubric.
Oh, I'll happy to get to them.
Yeah, but
So in the case of this program, has it produced a decision, or is that still pending?
No, it's still pending because frankly, the TNC wasn't able to give us enough information to properly be able to answer the questions that we would need to answer before I could even come to the board for a recommendation. Okay. So the next one is actually John Currier, Senate Bill 19. We wanted to just update the board on where we are with that and what the process is that the staff goes through when you get these requests. But John takes the lead on this.
Well, yeah, just briefly in response to some discussion within this board and in the hallways, we wanted to just give you a real brief update what goes on when we do a Senate Bill 19 approval. And you recall Senate Bill 19 basically just provided a mechanism where if you were putting your water right into some type of conservation program and up to 5 out of 10 years, you could, in any quantification of the historical consumptive use, you wouldn't be dinged for the lack of consumptive use in that year you donated or used your water right in some conservation plan. And first, this has been a relatively rare situation. I think, my memo says we've approved 6 of these in the past, actually 7 as of today. They're generally, since 2013. I think the frequency of them is going to increase. But generally, what I do when I evaluate this is really on a qualitative basis. Kind of do a quick change case analysis. Okay, what is the consumptive use? Where are other water rights located? What's the potential for injury to other water rights? And see if there's any obvious flags from a qualitative perspective that that are raised when they do this kind of analysis. And generally, because historically they've been so small and so geographically dispersed, the risk of injury has been, at least in my opinion, has been very, very remote. And so they're, in my mind, most of them are kind of no-brainers. The big ones that have occurred come down the pike with Grand Valley Water User Concerned Consumptive Use, which have very site-specific information and a lot of background information. And another big one that's been approved was actually this year, the Tamichi Creek Conserved Consumptive Use project that was, up in, just right above the town of Gunnison on Tamichi Creek. We had a lot of review by Upper Gunnison and other entities. And so we weren't essentially reviewing these in the dark or alone. So but when one comes down the pike that I think is problematic, I will raise it as being significantly problematic. And there may be a chance where one comes across that, I'm not sure we like that, and I'm not sure we as the River District staff would recommend approval of it. I don't see any of those in the immediate future, but not to say there might not be. The other thing that I think in response to discussion with this board is we can view these conservation programs as a learning tool and say, okay, provide us your information. And that's one thing we're asking people to do is provide us the information that they gain, to the extent they gain any, when you operate one of these systems, your conservation plan. What are you learning? Did it make water available for the stream reach you said it was going to make water available to? What were your impacts on the land? Were you able to quantify any return flow issues? Or, the answer is probably not, honestly, for most of these guys. But show us the information. There may be things that we as the River District and the collective community can learn by operation of the systems. And I'd say, another reason I'd say for us to just be kind of the lead dog in reviewing and improving these is so we basically know what's going on. Honestly, there's many other entities that could be approving Senate Bill 19 applications. To the best of my knowledge, we're the only ones in the River District geography that has done so. So I think it's a learning tool, and I think it helps us stay abreast of what's going on. Any thoughts, comments?
I'm just curious, what is the approval process as it's laid out in Senate Bill 19?
Well, the approval process, as it's laid out in Senate Bill 19, is basically whatever the entity approving it wants it to be. So, we, back in 2013, when the board said, yeah, we board should go forth and do this, we intentionally let that approval process be pretty straightforward. pretty simple. We don't require an applicant, when they submit their conservation plan, to provide us a huge amount of detail.
Is the river district called out in staff filemaking, or?
No, there's conservancy districts, conservation districts, other water districts. Upper Eagle Water and Sand can approve conservation plans. Upper Gunnison Water Conservancy District could approve plans. So there's any number of entities that could actually.
Colorado Water Conservation can approve. And so we, as a staff, we'd rather have our staff reviewing, knowing what's going on in our district and approving and having them approve it at that. And I will just remind the board, I'm pretty sure in 2013 the board assigned their approval authority to the staff to allow that.
Director Gray, you have a question?
So, John, I appreciate the update, and I just had a thought, as well as asking the applicants to provide information once they've implemented their, do we ask also that they contact users both upstream and downstream of the reach and get feedback from the people who might actually be affected? Because of course the applicant's going to say, yeah, it's great.
No, we're not asking them to go canvass the community. They certainly expecting.
Not the community.
Well, no, I mean that's what I meant.
That's
community
pretty small.
water users.
I'd kind of like to see that, because it's not all the way down the river. It's only those who are maybe affected upstream and those within the reach where the return holes may not actually they may be affected.
Yeah.
And they would be the ones that would say, yeah, I yes or no, do you think it was affected me? Because a lot of our discussion around Senate Bill 19 back in 2013 was to do with not harming other users who didn't have the resources to do anything about it.
Like I said, that's one of the things to look at on a qualitative basis. For the most part, I'd say the ones that have been approved so far, the additional water in the stream has benefited the downstream users far more than the loss of return.
That'd be good to know as well.
I think your point is well taken. In certain instances, it may be appropriate for the applicants to say, okay, what have you done?
I'm going to ask the same question I asked in 2013. What's the result of us okaying or accepting these conservation plans? I mean, what benefit is it to us, or what benefit other than the information we know is happening within the district? What benefit is it to the applicant? And how are we running a risk by taking on this role?
I don't see us taking any risk on our approval. Expressly states that we're not undertaking any obligations to ensure the veracity or the efficiency, I can't say the words. Thank you. It's too late in the day for me to do that properly. So I don't believe we're undertaking any specific obligations or liabilities. What do we get out of it other than keeping our nose in these things? I think as a river district, what we do get out of it is, to the extent that the approval process goes elsewhere, our nose is no longer involved in it. We don't really have a good idea of what's going on. Or to the extent that nobody approves such a program, then the water user, who may have an incentive, or presumably does have an incentive to enter into this type of program for whatever reason that incentive exists, would look elsewhere. I mean, they either face the risk of losing some of the historical yield component of their water right if they choose to go forward with such a program. They face potential abandonment of their water right without these protections. And or if they decide not to do a conservation program, they presumably have some other economic pressure. Maybe it's economic pressure, maybe it's something else that could or could not impact their use of water on the west side.
Follow-up question? Has it to this point in time been burdensome to staff? Or do you anticipate it becoming burdensome?
You know, Director Trempe, at the current rate that these things are rolling in, I don't expect it to be burdensome. And certainly I think if there's large ones that come in, I think the burden is going to fall more on the applicant, like Grand Valley Conserved Consumptive Use. So, yeah, you know, every one of these takes a couple hours of my time, but we're talking about 2 of these or 3 of them a year kind of thing. It's not a big deal time-wise.
So I guess, and I wasn't here in 13 when this thing got passed for Tom's conversation on it, but what happens if one entity approves it and agrees with it, another entity, I mean, you could have water conservation district and a water conservancy district, and you have 2 different opinions on it.
The applicant only is required to make
have one?
Correct.
Okay.
There's no requirement that if, for example, an applicant was located within the Upper Yampa district's boundaries, that they would have to make an application to both Upper Yampa and the River District. They can choose who they want to make the application to.
Thank you very much, Jim. Appreciate it. Moving on to item 4E, which is water lake quality and clarity. Mike Eitel, our water clarity and quality expert, is going to provide exactly
Clarity?
clarity.
A little about clarity, but while it's not nearly as glamorous as talking about the big river issues that we spent a lot of time this morning talking about, the Grand Lake Adaptive Management tries to be glamorous by having their own an acronym called GLAM, which stands for the Grand Lake Adaptive Management Process, which I and Jason are lucky enough to be able to attend on a weekly basis. But the basis for that is, as the memo states, we have an MOU with Grand County related to Grand Lake Clarity, which is also involved with the Bureau of Reclamation and Northern Water. And basically the adaptive management process is to try to attain the highest level of clarity in Grand Lake during the peak summer season up in Grand Lake, the tourist seasons from July through September 10th, which we are actively in. Adaptive management process, really, personally, it's a lot of lip service, a little bit, to be blunt. There's not much they can do because in the bottom line, the delivery of water is the primary means here, what they're after. So this year they've decided to try a different approach. On the weekends, they're going to slow down the delivery of Alva B. Adams to 220 CFS. During the week, they'll ramp it up to 440, which is about the normal delivery rates. For you guys, the 220 is probably interesting because it is the minimum power flow needed to produce power on the eastern slope as they drop that water down Big Thompson. The rest of that is all based on the Grand Lake clarity, and they try to maintain a clarity between 2.5 to 3.8 meters. They measure the clarity with this, guys, Secchi disc. I thought I'd bring a little show and tell, so if you haven't seen one.
It's about a 200-year-old instrument, isn't it?
It is. It's a very simple method to measure water quality. There's no lab science involved in this. What you do is you drop this down through the column of water. You look at it at the surface, you drop it down until you can't see it anymore. You pull it back up to where you can see it, and that's the level of clarity. What it is it's a repeatable method of measuring water quality, and it's really a surrogate for water quality. More transparent your water is, the clearer it is, the better the water quality. Less transparent, obviously degraded water quality. The simple operation of the CBT system brings water through Grand Lake that normally isn't there. It's nutrient laden, it's got inorganic particulate matter, sediment, different things like that. So it decreases the water quality. We're in the middle of the operation of the plan. I don't see, I think we're, with the depleted hydrology this year, we're expecting a high algae in Shadow Mountain at some point. It hasn't occurred yet. We have weekly meetings, go through a lot of data. There's a lot of real-time telemetry involved in water quality sampling, but it's all surrounded around this. And really, that's the basis of it. They go out 3 times a week and sample 3 different spots on the reservoir. You average them during that period. Right now, it's above 4 meters. To put it in perspective, before CPT came online, it was nearly 10 meters of clarity depth. Now you're lucky if you get above 5 on any given year. It usually hovers in that 3 to 4 meters range. So that's the basic gist of it. I don't see us changing the plans for the year's operation. Goes through Labor Day. A lot of interesting conversation happens at the meetings, but again, the adaptive management process, there's very little they can do right now. As Chimney Hollow comes online, they're going to be able to operate a little bit differently. But the bottom line is when they turn on the pumps, clarity in Grand Lake goes down the tubes. From there, I think we're actively pursuing with them. What's driving this also is there's a NEPA process that's going on adjacent to this or parallel. The Bureau does not want to officially start the process because of the changes in DC related to the NEPA process. Once they go into the EIS, they have 1 year to actually finish this now. And so we're a cooperating agency. The Bureau is trying to do a lot of the different analysis, economics, social stuff prior to the implementation of the NEPA process. When that'll start, I don't know, probably in the next year. Hopefully be finished by 5. We're in the 3 of a 5-year MOA. This is the 3rd year. And then with that, you also have the parallel Water Quality Control Commission's clarity water quality standard. That's going to go from a narrative to a some type of meter depth. At this point, it's not set in any. It's not set through the Water Quality Control Commission. With that, I would open up to any questions. If Jason has any input on the higher level issues, great.
The only thing I would, and Mike, you may have mentioned this, I don't know if I heard. One of the difficulties too is because this is a connected system. If you stop the pumping, your dissolved oxygen levels in Shadow Mountain drop, and you're not meeting those standards at that point. So it's a real balancing act. Sometimes you want to keep that pumping. We never say we want more water to be going over to the east slope, but in terms of water quality in the Three Lakes system, you do kind of have to keep moving that water. So it's a bit of a balancing act. And every time, we'll have this meeting and we'll come up with a game plan for the year, and everybody agrees to it, thinks it makes a lot of sense. The hydrology throws us a tailspin, and we end up having to change course mid-season. So it's been a difficult process, but informative.
We've tried various methods of pumping the FAR a little bit, but again, the bottom line is they have an obligation to deliver their water. So turning it on and off is really just kind of prolonging any bit of that delivery. They're still going to deliver that water at some point. This year, interestingly enough, though, with this method, they are maintaining the clarity in Grand Lake, because like Jason said, you want to keep Shadow Mountain somewhat clean or cleaner by keeping fresh water going through there rather than letting it, some people call it frog pond water, etc., that live up there, and it's just like kind of a cesspool. So if you stop the pumping of the FAR plant, that just kind of causes everything to go off, and once you have that sign of bacteria bloom, it just explodes. From there, I think the Bureau is at the table. We're willing to talk to us, so that's a good thing. Any operational changes that require additional pumping are usually met with but we're not going to do it because of the increased costs. So that's the bottom line, and I think my memo really states it clearly that power and water supply, even though they're just 2 of the components, seem to be the driving factors here.
I'm just curious about the community group that was established to get the federal designation, or what is
the outstanding waters. Yes,
is that group still active? Or?
They're still active, and I think you'll see that come back through the Northwest COG with their 208 and how they're going to address that. But I think you will see that group actually petition the Water Quality Control Commission on their own. Most likely, I would see that for an outstanding waters designation. And that's a whole different topic that Karin mentioned. It's just another avenue, and that's a local group that's put up by the Chamber of Commerce to again increase the clarity of Grand Lake. But that's the local kind of it's a different faction than say the water suppliers in the county. So it's a little bit at odds with what our mission is.
Yeah, what's been the process of, or any process, success in converting from septic to sewage?
So they have the Three Lakes Sand District up there, and I know a lot of that's online. I think just the grandfathered ones are there, but ones along the lake, they've all been piped, to my knowledge. And that's
But there's been a lot of historic loading from this.
Historic loading,
yes.
And quite honestly, just the pure fact of the pumping that water, absent the CBT system, this water, most of it would not enter Grand Lake. Some of it would because it comes naturally through Grand Lake, but and that's part of the 220. When they're doing the 220, they're trying to sweep off all the good water that comes out of the Rocky Mountain National Park into Grand Lake, and they take that native water right through the tunnel before it even goes into Shadow Mountain.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, Mike. Definitely appreciate it. Just to go through a few remaining items on my general manager's report, the Water Bank Work Group continues to meet. Bruce and Don Schwint from the Southwest are active participants. Our staff members are Chris Treese and Sonia Chavez, who are usually there. I do occasionally attend and probably will this coming meeting because it happens to be being held in this room, so I don't have to go too far. It is continuing to focus on secondary economic impacts that any kind of a water banking program would cause on the West Slope. And it's really been the focus and remains the focus. There may be other technical items that group could study in the context of the Upper Colorado River Commission's focus on what a demand management pool might look like and the concept of a bank, if you will. But if you have questions on that or what's in my memo, the Upper Colorado River Commission update, there's a bit in the memo. I guess I would just draw the attention, anybody who hasn't seen it in the news clippings that have gone out, the UCRC in its meeting in June did terminate their involvement in the System Conservation Pilot Program. Did so by unanimous vote on the motion of the state of Wyoming, primarily because there is not currently a non-equalized pool to put water into, and very few people in the Upper Basin understood why they should be creating system water that gets siphoned down to the Central Arizona project. It was phrased in the terms of a temporary halt or hiatus in order to encourage the creation of a pool. So that's kind of where we are. I think it was a good move for a lot of reasons, but it doesn't mean that idea has gone away or actually lacks support at the Upper Colorado River Commission. The next item on my memo is a consulting contract with Eric, as I say in the memo, with Eric Kuhn. I say in the memo, this is technically under my delegated discretion for 2018. We'll be retaining Eric as a consultant to work on Colorado River, Big River issues on a very limited basis, no more than 35 hours a week. I do believe that Eric's involvement continues to provide Peter and I and John and DK a lot of additional help on the Colorado River issues. This is not something that is, I don't look at this as an indefinite situation, but as something that would assist me and the rest of the staff. I did want to see if there were concerns or feedback from the board, understanding that it is always a little unusual to retain your former general manager as a consultant.
Any comments?
Well, how long will he be hanging out as chair of the technical committee of UCRC?
That's an excellent question, Dave. I don't know how that committee sets its rules. And so it's
Very nebulous.
yes,
Loose.
yes, right. So, but he is the chair currently.
And along with UCRC, Amy Haas, is she moving to Salt Lake, or is she, because she was taking that position originally from New Mexico, was she not, and doing some commuting back and forth?
Peter, you know she's...
I believe she's part-time in Salt Lake and part-time in New Mexico. I don't know if, having now become the executive director, if she plans to make the move full-time. My understanding is that she is not.
They are looking for an engineer for the Upper Colorado River Commission deputy chair positions. We don't have any engineers.
Somebody younger. Because, you know, it's with things in flux there. I mean, is there but the potential that the UCRC office would move to somewhere in New Mexico? I mean, 'cause they've been in Utah, proximal to reclamation for since the 50s, I believe.
Yeah, I haven't heard that any.
They left Grand Junction with
Right.
Utah.
Yeah, I haven't heard any discussion of that. Certainly, if there was such a discussion, I would assume that we would say if they go anywhere, they should go into the basin.
Yeah.
Grand Junction would be a logical choice. And my understanding is that because of their technology, at least historically, was kind of tied into Reclamation's office. Maybe there's a reason for staying there tied into the Salt Lake Office of Reclamation, but I don't know if that's still the case or not. They may have made some progress in separating from Reclamation's technology.
Next item is just, again, a heads up. We have an inventor on staff, Hunter Causey. Hunter developed an item which is in his memo. We violate trademarks by calling it GoPro on a rope. It's not licensed by GoPro, but it's a sport camera on a rope that he devised to help us examine our dams underwater and in difficult places. Hunter has asked, well, let me start by saying Hunter thinks this idea could make him some money by marketing. I wish him luck, but I also don't wish to spend any district resources doing that. And so we have in our policy manual that we own the intellectual property that our staff creates during their tenure here. I'd like to waive that for this particular item because I maybe it will help Hunter put his daughter through college. His daughter's 6 months old, but she crushed his hand. So if I just want to make sure there was no consternation over that by this board. I you know, as Hunter points out in his memo that's attached to mine, it really isn't within our mission and our strategic plan to try to market commercial items like this, and I just don't see. I mean, honestly, even a licensing agreement or something like that would take more staff resources than I think we're going to get in return. No offense, Hunter, but
And he's going to retire as a millionaire in 2 years.
You can prove that I was wrong in that, right? So,
Do you need a motion?
nope, I just, okay, yeah, just want
Any
to,
objection?
no objection, this is really all I was looking for. Get to most important element of my report, which is service anniversaries. We have 2 employees who are celebrating their 10 years of service with the district. We're going to start with Jason Turner and Peter, his immediate supervisor. Can you tell us what's going on with Jason? It's 10 years here.
I did this 5 years ago, so. Yeah, hard to believe it's been 10 years. I think it goes without saying I couldn't do the job that I do. The River District would not be served to the extent that it is without having Jason to help out and do just an incredible job at the River District, taking on a lot of the grunt work, that makes the things that the River District does do happen and protects the River District's interests in doing them, but is not as glamorous as spending 7 hours in the car trying to get to Denver with Andy yesterday. So, Jason, not enough words. I just want to thank you very much on behalf of everybody on the staff and the sheriff's board as well.
And next is Dave Smith, who is in the engineering department with John Courier. Dave, thank you.
It's hard for me to believe that Dave Smith has been on the River District for 10 years. That means I've been with the River District for more than 8 years. You know, Dave and my history goes back to 91. We started working together in resource engineering here in town, so I have a long history with Dave. And Dave, you know, Dave he's just sort of a steady workhorse. You know, really has a great attitude. He's kind of got a get her done, perspective on things, and helps with mapping and whatever we need in the enterprise, and water quality sampling, to doing all the drawings for the crest restoration at Wilford. So kind of a jack of all trades and a good just a pleasure to work with, and congratulations, Dave. Great job.
Yeah, I would just second what John said. Dave is somebody who is always helping, and it's not just in the engineering department. When I first got here, I knew he was supposed to be in the engineering department, but I saw him helping people out throughout the district, and it really, no one even has to ask. Dave is just there helping. So thank you, Dave. We're done with my report, sir. That's it. Number 1 is Cruz. Yep, Mr. Cruz, and I want to point out that I'm on time, Peter.
Well, elapsed time, perhaps.
2:30. Oh, look at that. Very good. So yeah, we're ready for our annual policy discussion. Chris, lead us through this.
So under tab 5, you have the policy discussion coming back to you this quarter with 2 policies returning to you for eligible for final approval. My memo says that the attachments have changes in blue. It kept changing color on me. When I printed it out this morning, it shows up in red, so I'm not sure what color you see, but you'll see the changes in a different color. So the board voted last quarter to approve the prior appropriation policy, but after you finished that motion and that vote, there was some subsequent discussion about wanting to add some language about water shepherding for compact purposes, as had been part of another discussion. Accordingly, you have on attachment the prior appropriation doctrine, language added that simply, and perhaps, simply states to equitably allocate water uses and to ensure water rights, including conserved consumptive use, are equitably administered. And that is offered to you in fulfillment of the conversation you had and the request you made as staff.
But only in the event of compact administration on this conserved consumptive use.
Yes, sorry, that's existing language, so yes, the only additional language is adding that phrase that then concludes within the event. Thank you.
Do we need a motion then, Chris, to finally adopt this as revised?
Yes.
Or re-adopt?
Please.
Unless there are any other changes. It could go back.
I move staff recommendation.
Second.
Motion Monger, second. Callan, is that you? Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Thank you. The second policy is your in-stream flow policy. It started in January. You also discussed this in April. But at the April meeting, an additional concern was raised about some of the language, two areas of the language. One is the need for protection of future water development opportunities. The second one was a request to ask the CWCB to better define or to add some rules around let's see, what was the old language was aquatic environment. To the aquatic environment question. Aquatic environment is not the language used in the statute. So what I'm suggesting is that we change the language of the policy to mirror the language of the statute and the requirements of the CWCB to benefit the natural environment to a reasonable degree. So it's natural environment that replaces aquatic environment in the policy. And secondly, it is added in the background section, as was the specific request from the board. It says that accordingly, that the result of in-stream flow appropriations, especially when rights are located in the lower reaches of streams and rivers, it's incumbent on the CWCB to protect reasonably foreseeable future water development opportunities when deciding whether to file and the quantification of any in-stream flow rights. So it's a question of whether, as well as just exactly how large a quantification. This certainly speaks directly to our involvement in the Dolores case. Certainly there are plenty of other examples where it could be effective and pertinent. So those are brought to you with your opportunity to change or adopt or add.
Comments? Suggestions? A motion.
I move we approve.
Second.
Motion Whitmore, second Richard. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Carried.
Okay, and as General Manager Mueller said, this is your opportunity to ask for further changes. It's also your opportunity to, again, identify any other areas of concern of existing policies or areas that you feel we are deficient in not having a policy statement and a background explanation of where you stand and what direction you're providing to staff as guidance.
Seeing none, I guess we'll move to the legislative.
All right.
Update and outlook.
I don't want to spend, I don't have a lot of action. I don't have any action specifically, but I do want to offer the opportunity for direction and provide a few updates, starting with state affairs. Actually, I'm sorry, before I get into state and federal affairs, Zane, if you want to join us, and I do want to provide an update on our education and outreach efforts. Also, I spoke to Director Whitmore, who's the chairman of the Education and Outreach Committee of the board, and apologized to her. We did try to schedule an education and outreach meeting, as was the committee's request in January, to meet more than once a year. This mid-year would be the logical time to do that, but because of Eric's celebration, we're going to have to let that stand as our education for the evening. Zane, you want to bring us up to date, please, on some of the activities?
So it's been a busy 7 months for us on the external affairs team, and Andy has borne the brunt of a lot of our efforts. We've been running him around the state to 11 States of the Rivers meetings, Roaring Fork Valley, Craig, Eagle County, Grand County, Gunnison, Mesa, Rangeley, Rifle, Steamboat Springs, Summit, and Ouray. It's the most States of the Rivers that we've ever done in a single year. We reached more than 1,200 attendees in 11 meetings. significant press attention, both leading up to and helping to publicize the events, and also a lot of press coverage following the events. Primarily because of the historic drought and the low flow year. The water issues that we discussed and presented at these States of the River meetings were of importance and were certainly newsworthy. Annual report, which we discussed at the last quarterly board meeting, is finished. Kudos to Jim on that. More than 1,700 copies printed. We did a direct mailing to local governments, county governments, libraries, about 300, I believe, total. Were sent out in direct mailings, and we'll be sending more out in anticipation of a public officials outreach effort that we're conducting in the coming 3 to 4 weeks. Website and social media, our online presence has increased significantly since implementation of our new media communications plan, focusing primarily on positive name recognition and brand recognition throughout the district. We, as of this morning, had 63,000 impressions since January 1 on Facebook, resulting in 8,500 direct engagements with constituents in the district. 8,500 direct engagements, roughly 90% of those are residents of the district. Pretty even split between male and female, but largest followings are on the Colorado main stem, with growing audiences in the Yampa and Gunnison River basins. Short story there is the trend is headed in the right direction. There's still a lot of work to do to meet our goals that we laid out in January. General press relations, as I kind of alluded to, the drought, low flows, overuse in the lower basin, Aaron Millions pipeline proposal resurgence. All of these things have led to a number of unique opportunities for us to engage with the press and to get Andy in front of them, as well as the experts here on the staff. I feel as though we've had a good presence in regional, local, and statewide mediums, including Colorado Public Radio stories, local public radio, and a lot of print, your local papers in your areas. We continue to underwrite local public radio and Colorado Public Radio, which is one of our more long-standing marketing efforts. We continue to see that as a valuable investment of our resources, and I think a number of us on staff are contacted on the sidewalk and say, hey, you guys sponsor the River Report, or it's just one of those things where it's very local, and I feel as though it's a deserved continued investment of our resources.
So if you're not in a market area where you hear this, our underwriting is not just that tagline underwritten by. We have locally we have the Colorado River Report or Roaring Fork River Report, giving you not only the numbers of the day, but some perspective on whether that's high or low or the average for the date. That seems to be well appreciated. We started it, and it's since become something we share on a rotating basis throughout the week, daily rotating sponsorship basis with another watershed group, 2 other watershed groups, and a couple others that have decided this is a great way to brand themselves as well.
A couple other quick things. H2O Outdoors was on April 18th through 20th. That's something that Martha leads on. This year they changed it to the spring, and if you're not familiar with it, it's a partnership that the district's been involved in for more than 10 years, co-sponsored by Aurora Water, Denver Water, and the River District, and held at the Keystone Science School, really targeting a diverse group of students from Front Range and Western Slope. This year was a much lower turnout than we've seen in the past, likely because of the date change, and unfortunately no Western Slope participation from students. One student from Western Slope. They have rescheduled it for the fall. We've committed to one more round on this at the very least, October 23 through 25, and are going to be doing a more robust amount of outreach to local school districts on the Western Slope in hopes that we can increase the Western Slope student participation, which I think is important to justifying our investment. Mesa County Water Festival we took part in once again this year, attracted about 2,000 students over 2 days in May. And then speakers bureaus. We continue to get out there as members of the EA team to speak with Elks and Rotary and whoever will have us. So Jim's been in the North Fork of late. I've done a number of them here, and Chris has been around Mesa County and Montrose. So if you or colleagues or members and want to get us out there, let us know. Upcoming is the annual water seminar, Friday, September 14th. I look forward to another successful program this year, and happy to answer any questions that you have.
Webinar?
Oh, webinar is tentatively held for the 29th of August. This is something that Andy and Alicia and Chris and I have been working on with a variety of other folks on staff, but it's targeted specifically at public officials. So your county commissioners, your town council members, town managers and county managers, really just recognizing that an informed citizenry, as Andy and others have said in the past, is our best defense of Western Slope water resources. And recognizing that those public officials are a key link in that chain to communicating and educating the public. This is going to be kind of a Water 101. We're in the process of building the actual presentations. It will feature Chris Treese and Andy Mueller, and it'll be an hour-long webinar just explaining to folks who the River District is, what we do, why it's important, both from a local, intrastate, and interstate basis.
So, Zane, is this going to be for candidates or only elected officials?
Elected officials and public servants are our key target audience.
We have a discussion about trying to get something in front of candidates as well, so they come into office knowing something.
Yes, and we do.
I'm sorry, didn't mean that.
Knowing something. Chris has done the River District 101.
I think specifically to the webinar, we are primarily targeting, but it's certainly not the exclusive audience. That will be open, and we will market it, or if you will, broadly. Additionally, then on state candidates, very deliberately, to county commissioner candidates, less so, but opportunistically, we try to meet with them before the election. All the West Slope candidates for state office.
Pardon?
Will you be sending out a link or information that we could pass
on the webinar?
along?
You will be on our distribution list. We are going to start with a direct mailing to our town managers, elected officials, and public servants. That will be followed up by electronic distribution. I should thank Meredith Spiker, who has done a great job trying to help update our lists, combing through Colorado Municipal League's list and Colorado Counties Incorporated. And so we've updated our lists. You are all going to be included on that. We expect to send that out at the end of this month. Again, a target date for the webinar is August 29th.
Do you have county administrators?
Yes. Yeah.
And I would just like to say, when Chris mentioned we weren't having an education and outreach meeting at this meeting, it never occurred to me that we actually needed one, simply because it seems as though you all have been putting out such huge efforts at outreach, and they have been so successful. And I can't thank you enough for having the URA State of the River meeting. It was well received. People really appreciated the attention and the information. And the newly formatted, instead of calling it the annual report, Teaching Water piece is great. And I have sent that out to a lot of people, and even taken over to Montrose County. And really, really nice job. The whole team.
Thank you.
just like to add that there's some parts, I heard you talking about the media that you're using to reach out, but there's some areas of the state that get limited access or availability to other sources of media. I mean, we've got one AM station that's in Colorado that we pick up. So, I mean, otherwise it's in rural, otherwise we get Utah. So, but those are things that we get being in a remote part of the world we live with, but you kind of get forgotten too. So please don't forget about those that live on the outer reaches of the Western Slope.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
There are people in Rangeley with Facebook accounts, and they're actually targeted. So,
Oh, is that right?
one by one.
I'm sorry.
They're calling them up.
I've listened to some of Luke Runyon's CPR reports, and I was wondering what background or what connection he has. I think those have been really great in terms of just the general person who doesn't think they care about water, getting them pulled in.
Luke's doing great work. He was the keynote at our Roaring Fork Valley State of the Rivers meeting, and really focused on kind of the human dimensions of water management. It was well received. He's a product of the Roaring Fork Valley, started at Aspen Public Radio, and I think I've put him in front of Andy a few times, so Andy's an established source of his at this point, and we'll continue to try to work with him and any other person that wants to, any other reporter that wants to tell our stories.
Well, and then I wanted to say I've been jealous when I've heard the river report on KJAX. And I'm curious because it's really simple. It's just saying, see, this is the CFS here and there, and it's low, high, like you said. So it's something anybody can relate to. But I think it really pulls people in who don't necessarily know much about water to just get, it's kind of a hook. And so, how can I get that in our station? Work with our watershed group to maybe coordinate, or
Yeah, that would be one way. You're a little bit harder. You get KUNC for your
right. I was
radio,
thinking
don't
of
you?
our local KSNT.
Or we could do, okay.
Yes. And Crystal, those two are
Yeah,
local.
that's true. We can talk about that.
Okay. Because I think it's a great hook, and it's just simple information, and it doesn't take a lot of seconds on air to say, but
No.
I think it's a good
And it is, I mean,
citizenry.
you're right,
Yeah.
it is both the anglers and the rafters whose ears prick up. But everybody, when people are talking about low flow, dry years, so on, people on the street will mention to me, yeah, I heard this morning, it sounds like things are running about a third of what's normal.
I've thought the same thing to get it in Eagle County. The other thing that does is connect all the communities that are on that river. Right. And makes them remember that what happens in Aspen happens in Glenwood.
That's not always true.
On the river, right.
All right, great.
All right? Thanks, Steve.
So,
why don't you stay?
so Chris, maybe if it's all right with you, we missed a break.
Yeah.
And this would be an opportune time. Just a short one, 10-minute break. We're doing well on schedule, so
okay.
That's all right with you. Come back to state affairs.
bi-weekly meetings during the legislative session. Those are immensely helpful to both Zane and me, and we never wanted for or worried about a quorum each and every meeting, and that I really appreciate that. I know that that's a lot of time out of very busy calendars, and certainly a significant addition to your quarterly responsibilities to which you were appointed. So we thank you for that very much. A couple updates and trying to focus on sort of the future and things that are happening about which you may wish to give some direction or comment in terms of time and priorities, commitment of resources. The budget, as I say every year, will continue to be an annual challenge, a perennial challenge. The latest forecasts from the legislative economists project that the state may exceed its revenue limits under Tabor and have Tabor refund requirements for the next 2 years. The April forecast was very favorable and allowed the legislature to, with relative ease, pass their budget by giving significant dollars to a number of different areas: transportation, raises, and the para system. But they were not projecting that we were going to run into Tabor limitations for at least a couple years. Now, the new June forecast says that we could be seeing Tabor limitation refunds triggered as early as next year and running for the next 2, or just today, a couple other economists came out and said 3 years. Worthy of note, I mentioned that these are the legislature's economists. The governor's economists are not so sanguine. They are not projecting a refund, but $200 million is the legislative economists' projections for the next 3 years of Tabor refunds. Those are significant. Also significant is that the severance tax has, admittedly from a very low number, the forecast for severance tax has doubled, and the amount of refunds under the British Petroleum decision by the Supreme Court in the 3 years of claimable rebates or refunds are now abating, are dwindling, and they're projecting that the severance tax account will be in relatively good shape. That does not solve either a short or a long-term problem, however. Still too tight under the severance tax revenue forecast is any funding for the Tier 2 programs. Tier 2 programs include the Water Supply Reserve Fund, the WSRF funds that the roundtables rely on, Native Species Trust Fund, the invasive species programs. These programs continue to currently be institutionalized as a Tier 2 program, which means they get funds last. Because of relative abundance of revenues, the Joint Budget Committee deserves the credit. Joint Budget Committee has been able to fund those programs with a little bit of sleight of hand back and forth between transfers between general fund to severance tax and back again. But the bottom line is they have been funded, but they continue to be structurally set up not to receive funds. And when revenues get tighter, they will be the first to go out. Accordingly, I'm working with a small group within the Colorado Water Congress looking at the long-term funding question and the unreliability of severance tax as the essentially sole source for the state's water projects and programs, both the Colorado Water Plan as well as the Water Conservation Board Construction Fund and the operational account for the Water Conservation. Looking at that, the first step, I think, and the easiest step, the one that will have quick consensus, is to collapse or remove the Tier 2 distinction and put all the programs that are currently in Tier 2 into basically Tier 1, so that they are all evaluated on their merits and not artificially subjugated to a second tier.
That still may mean cuts, but it will mean cuts because they have been weighted equally and not according to a historical categorization. Additionally, to talk a little bit more about funding, there are another couple programs, both of which Mr. Mueller is a member of, looking at long-term funding for the Colorado Water Plan, the revenue gap of roughly $100 million annually, as identified in the Colorado Water Plan, the question of how do we continue a water plan without the resources that are available. There are a couple different efforts, including at the IBCC, looking at how do we answer that question, what are the options. Most of those two efforts are looking largely, but not exclusively, at ballot questions of a new revenue source that would require a statewide voter approval. Everything from a fee on on monthly water bills, to a bottle tax or a tax or a fee on all liquids and containers sold, and of course then you get into what gets infant formula and milk and other things that you quickly exclude or may exclude. Anyway, but looking at that and trying to come up with some different alternatives, both in terms of equity as well as saleability, if you will, on a ballot question.
I want to step back and just note Representative Rankin and Senator Millie Hamner's work on funding for our water programs within the Tier 2 and the water roundtable grants. I know that Representative Rankin and Hamner represent a number of your counties, and so if you see them, make sure to tell them thank you, because they were really our line of defense and helped out a lot on the JBC, and we miss them both when they are gone.
Representative Hamner is term limited this year. Representative Rankin will be back, I believe, for another 2 years, but uncertain whether or not no guarantee that he will continue on the Joint Budget Committee. Certainly hoping. And that is, I appreciate that, Zane, and that is true, as was noted last year, for at least the last 2 years. Both of those representatives have been really instrumental in protecting our interests. A couple of the other things, interim committees, there are a number of interim committees we're following this year. Water Resources Review Committee continues to meet, looking at a number of different issues. I've covered them in the memo. I won't repeat them here. Any questions or priorities you want to express, certainly welcome. There's also an alternatives to the Gallagher Amendment. And very quickly, because we're going to spend a little more time on this, certainly in the budget workshop, the Gallagher Amendment is that which determines the residential assessment ratio for property taxes, and that has just come down from 7.8 to 7.1, and is projected to, this residential assessment ratio is projected to go down another 15% next year to 6.1 or 6.11. My current numbers, whatever it is, it's likely to be a significant decline that has direct impacts on all the local governments that rely on general fund, most notably today the Colorado River District. And so we look at this interim committee is meeting just a handful of times, a small committee. It is meeting tomorrow in Glenwood Springs. Right upon your adjournment, I'll be headed over there. They're looking at what the state legislature might be able to do based on the first hearing last week in Denver. It sounds like there's little they can do. They might consider a statewide initiative or referred measure from the legislature, but none of the members that I heard express an opinion felt that the likelihood of success was particularly high. What that means is that all of us who are concerned about and reliant upon general fund revenues and are negatively impacted, and in some cases, including the river districts, I think disproportionately impacted, we'll have to consider going to our own ballot for our own district and asking voters to de-Gallagherize. That de-Gallagherization necessarily includes a de-Brucing question, narrow or broad, but that's a further discussion for another day. But I want to let you know that we are following that process very closely to understand where that is, as well as who our allies might be if we go to the ballot or if there is a statewide ballot question.
I would just say that it's going to be a point of discussion at our budget meeting in September to a much larger extent. We will have a proposal to you to address these issues.
Do you know if Colorado Mountain College is going back out to voters?
They have not officially, the board has not officially indicated that they will. I understand they might be having a meeting mid to late August before the deadline is certified.
I know they have given a letter of intent to the county clerks, a placeholder.
Yeah, well,
You said you'd have a proposal in September. Do you mean a ballot proposal?
No, I mean a strategy from in terms of dealing with this issue. It may include a recommendation that we evaluate the proposal and kind of what the analysis.
But not this year.
Not for, no, certainly not for 2018.
The August
last minute
meeting.
announcement.
Yeah.
What do you do the rest of the Sunday?
That's paid. So, and again, we're going to go through the budget report in the audit later, but have we analyzed what the 6.1 is, how many dollars that is?
Yeah, we're looking at somewhere between $600,000 and $750,000 annually out of our general fund.
That's pretty easy. It's really going to hit our county really hard.
Did you just say that's easy?
Well, I think it's more than.
Easy decision.
Well, no, I thought, I actually figured it would be more than that. Well, 600.
Oh.
But
It's at least 15%.
Compared to our revenue, that's a
a lot, yeah. Yeah, we don't have a $100 million budget like that. Like Garfield does.
The other interim committee we'll be following is, again, a committee that's almost become a perpetual committee, a perennial committee, is the Wildfire Matters Review Committee. And we'll talk a little bit more about some positive developments in my federal report, but I think of significance that the state continues to look at wildfire, and encouragingly, the Wildfire Committee has annually recognized and tied wildfire to watershed discussions, both in terms of forest health as well as post-fire issues and mitigation requirements, and the implications or relative benefits of prevention versus attempting mitigation in post-fire situations. The elections, I don't think I have. The only new item is there is now a Republican in House District 62, a Republican candidate. That's Don Valdez's district. That's mostly the San Luis Valley and Pueblo West, or out to Pueblo West. But it also includes Saguache County. So it's a district I consider a river district, representative's district. And that now has it's a heavily D district, but the Representative Valdez has been criticized recently for perhaps not living within his district. He got married not too long ago to a woman who has a house in Pueblo West, and that is not in the district. And so there's been some controversy, and I just mention it because it may be changing faces in addition to those that we have already, that we may be able to predict.
Who was the candidate?
His name is Scott Honeycutt. I don't know. Well, I do know a little bit about him. He has run before. So he has some experience in campaigning. He has some experience in losing campaigns. But beyond that, I don't know a whole lot. I just saw it the other day, yesterday. Just made the ballot. November ballot initiatives of interest, a pair of ballot initiatives, one on redistricting, one on reapportionment, would create a commission instead of having the legislature in charge. The legislature historically, after every census, has failed to come up with a redistricting, reapportionment plan that was accepted by either the other house or the governor, and has ended up in the courts every time. This is to provide a less partisan, ideally a nonpartisan commission to draw those legislative boundaries for districts following the every 10-year census. Those Amendment Y and Amendment Z were passed by the legislature because the two competing efforts on citizens initiatives got together right by the end of the legislative session, and at the very end of April, the very beginning of May, both houses were able to pass by 2/3 a resolution sending that to the ballot for voter approval. There are a number of other proposals out there. One I want to point out that I wrote the transportation funding. There are two competing, or I'll call them competing, initiatives. Neither has made the ballot yet. I was down in Denver at the Cherry Creek Arts Festival. People were out there with literally stacks of clipboards asking for signatures. And fascinating how they characterize this, give the people a chance to vote on, don't you want your roads improved, and not much additional information. Or don't you, do you support schools and school children? Do you support teachers? Do you like kids? Yeah, do you drive like right. We will be working with with all the candidates. The outlook, in addition to the materials that are coming out from the interim committees. I mentioned in my memo that the Colorado Main Stem and the Yampa White Green CWCB board members, the Colorado River District Russ George, who should be here tonight, is interested in not serving, not being reappointed. Jay Gallagher has served 2 terms, and I believe, and I don't know for a fact, but the new governor will make that appointment. But we should be thinking about people who are interested and who would be good CWCB board members. With that, I ask if there are any questions about federal state affairs before I begin federal affairs, or any priorities or directions, concerns. We will try to keep you apprised with a periodic memo as the interim committees either are headed with some consensus or failure to reach consensus. We'll let you know that as well, just to keep you apprised.
Have detection efforts for quagga mussels identified any other mussels in the state?
Not in the water bodies. The inspection programs continue to intercept boats that are infected before they enter the waters. There was an article 3 weeks ago that said that the bloom, their word, the bloom in quagga mussels in Lake Powell was unprecedented, and they talked about rafts of mussels floating along the surface of the water, in addition to where they've colonized in their traditional anchored locations. They apparently are floating along. So the situation immediately in our neighborhoods with our neighbors is very dire, and the situation therefore for our inspection program critically important.
So is it expected that the mussels will be working their way upstream up the Colorado River from Lake Powell?
Not in terms of migration, but in terms of movement by boats and other human-caused transport. That's the concern.
But they won't move naturally up the river?
No. They might move downstream, they would not be able to move upstream. That was the good news. Anything else? Federal affairs, a number of items that are since my July 5th memo, just to highlight for you. Director Gray, I think you were the one who asked about the Land and Water Conservation Fund and whether or not there's been a shift in funding or whether there's a movement toward shift in funding. I mentioned that it was not reauthorized. It officially sunset or expired, because things don't really sunset in the federal world, in 2015. But it has, there aren't any significant changes in the purpose for the funding year to year, but over time, there's been a very significant change from what many considered was a primarily recreational purpose to a federal agency problem-solving, consolidation, land inclusion, things like mining claims, buying out mining claims. Number of shifts over the years from outdoor recreation to land ownership, federal ownership or land changes, things like the Great Sand Dunes, putting together the Great Sand Dunes National Monument from whatever the previously protected area was, and the inclusions of some of the properties around it. That has been a shift, but I think you were asking more about the year-to-year or the more recent this administration, for instance. Yeah, there's a limited amount of that. The Farm Bill, well, let's see, one of the, you probably all read that EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt resigned and left and is no longer. Andrew Wheeler, Marty, did you ever work with him? I've met Andrew a couple times, and I know he's pretty well known. He used to be a staffer for the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. Understands our issues well, understands the regulated community and its frustrations and its concerns. And I think will be a much more hands-on, specific, detail-focused problem solver as opposed to some of the, in contrast to what I would characterize as some bigger, broader policy areas and headline-grabbing priorities that Mr. Pruitt had. But Andrew Wheeler is, frankly, I know him to be approachable. So I think that's a positive shift for the water community. The Farm Bill, we have a Farm Bill that has now passed the House by one vote and then had a very broad bipartisan vote in the Senate. They are significantly different farm bills from the House and Senate version, and as always, all the action now shifts to a conference committee. Conferees have not yet been appointed, and it no longer looks like that where the conference committee could happen before, will happen before the August recess. Hopefully we will have at least conferees before that, and our fingers are crossed that Mr. Bennett will be named in the conference committee. Waters of the U.S., just real quickly, the Federal Register notice last week that the administration proposes to repeal, call it the Obama-era Waters of the U.S. rule, and that would simply, and in the Federal Register notice is not a proposal to rewrite, though that effort continues, that the Federal Register notice was to repeal and to return to the pre-Obama Waters of the U.S. rule. And the the whipsawing Supreme Court decisions that inform the administration of the guidance documents. So that's definitely a mixed bag, and yet to be seen. The short comment period likely to be extended. It's just open, I think, a 30-day comment period. One other thing that probably should have started with was to let you all know, because we'll have some of these people tonight. The Southeastern District and the Bureau of Reclamation this morning, or at lunchtime, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Rudeye Reservoir and the Frying Pan Arkansas project up at Rudeye. Eric Kuhn is representing us in giving a quick history on Rudeye and why this particular project worked, and the River District's role in ensuring that the mitigation requirements of the Conservancy Act in Colorado was adhered to, was honored, and that the West Slope was protected with the construction of Rudeye Reservoir and the waters therefrom. So some of the Southeast folks and Bureau folks will be here tonight, obviously Eric too.
Yeah, thought he might come.
So we'll hear about how that went. A couple other in the rotating doorway in this administration. Former Colorado State Forester Jim Hubbard has been nominated as Undersecretary for Natural Resources under the USDA, which means he's basically the chief forester, and that will be a significant benefit, I think, to Colorado. And Jim is another who has always been approachable and understands the benefits of state partnerships and local partnerships in projects and programs. Senator Bennett did, just after your April meeting, did introduce his bill to protect 60,000 acres as wilderness in the San Juan National Forest. There are only a couple areas in the River District in Ouray County. I've been working with Director Whitmore, and I have not heard anything. I sent an email last week to Senator Bennett's office, to John Whitney, to see where things were, and you haven't heard anything, and you haven't heard that Foster's been contacted either regarding the water rights in that area. Okay. So as always, we continue to work to first protect the water rights, conditional and absolute, within a wilderness area, to ensure that access to water and the water right is maintained, reasonable access is maintained, and that the conditional water rights are explicitly called out to make sure that they are recognized as potential future development that is explicitly recognized, that is planned and accommodated within the wilderness language. So Senator Bennett has indicated his willingness to work with us. Some confusion over exactly what rights are there and whether or not how they may be implicated. The Water Resources Development Act, WRDA, that's traditionally the Army Corps of Engineers authorizing legislation for its projects for 2 to 4 years. In the Senate version of WRDA this year, there is a reclamation title. Within the reclamation title, we have language that will reauthorize and extend the annual operating funding for the recovery programs for the Upper Colorado River and the San Juan River recovery programs for the same fish. And that's a significant help, and so we'll be watching WRDA more closely than we would normally, not being as interested in Army Corps projects as we are traditionally reclamation projects. The other interesting thing that just this month was introduced, there were 8 to 10 bills that were introduced to update, reform, and reauthorize the Endangered Species Act. Of particular interest is something that the acronym is Storage Act, and Mr. Barrasso from Wyoming has sponsored. It's a fairly lengthy bill, but frankly, I see it as a very reasonable bill. Primarily, I would characterize the bill as, first of all, it is almost entirely in lockstep with the recommendations, the consensus unanimous recommendations of the Western Governors Association regarding the Endangered Species Act and legislative improvements that they have requested. The other is a heavy institutionalization and reliance on partnerships with the states in the listing process, in the recovery identification and recovery implementation process for listed species. There are some shortened time frames that are of some concern to environmental groups, but by and large, the environmental groups have not come out wholesale against the Storage Act as introduced. Hearing actually this morning, Bob Broscheid, the director of Colorado Parks and Wildlife, testified, I believe on behalf of the Western Governors Association, but certainly on behalf of Colorado, in favor of the heavy emphasis on state partnerships in the ESA implementation. Let's see. Oh, I mentioned the wildfires, and I think, I'm trying to remember the timing, when Congress finally passed an omnibus spending bill for the current fiscal year, rather than just an extension. We do now have a budget through the end of the federal fiscal year, September 30. In that budget, the Congress essentially eliminated fire borrowing for at least the next 10 years, starting 2 years out. And also had a number of categorical exclusions for faster implementation of forest management projects and programs. Of concern is that that only related to, specifically only to something referred to as fire regimes 1, 2, and 3. Fire regimes 4 and 5 are what we have in the Intermountain West. We have fires that, frankly, at the Lake Christine fire was probably a regime 3. It was lower, it was the pinyon and juniper, but the lodgepole, and spruce, the high mountain, the 8,000, 9,000 feet and up, is this fire regime 4 and 5 categorical exclusions were not provided, were not eligible for those fire regimes. That's of some concern and is being looked at as possible amendments in the Farm Bill. But it is good news on fire borrowing. Additionally, it was just last week, Senate Ag Appropriations provided an additional $4.3 billion to fight wildfires. That's in addition to the 10-year rolling average that current legislation requires to be funded, and is on top of the elimination of fire borrowing. So that means that forest treatments, mitigation, fire prevention, healthy forest management, watershed management programs can continue without being robbed by firefighting needs. Number of bullets on the waters of the U.S. that I won't go into. Also some additional information in my memo on the Farm Bill, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. I think Andy talked that mentioned that the System Conservation Pilot Partnership Program, SCPP, that the Upper Commission voted to discontinue that, feeling that until we had a non-equalized pool, that we've learned what we need to learn, or we have the information that we need to learn from, and that additionally putting water into the system as system water benefits nobody, certainly not the person or the state that's putting water, that's foregoing consumptive uses. I guess one other thing, the last thing I'll mention, though, I'll certainly open it up to questions. Senator Bennett and Gardner both have been very helpful. Senator Bennett, because he's really been walking this walk with us all along, was able to get some language, some amendments into the Farm Bill addressing some of our biggest concerns with and frustrations that we've all experienced in the implementation of the Lower Gunnison RCPP program, and allowing for some additional flexibility of funding and matching and uses, some direction for the reduction or elimination of duplicate permitting, the appointment of a lead agency to permit and implement RCPP programs of like the Lower Gunnison. That's been very helpful, and I think we owe a debt to both senators' offices, and notably that both senators' offices have been working very easily, very well, in a very bipartisan fashion that has been noted and continues to benefit Colorado because of that from both sides of the border. So with that, I have a number of other things that are in the memo. I haven't made any additions to our priorities for the rest of this year. They all continue to make, or nearly all continue to make progress. There are an awful lot of things going on in Washington, and as just even today, there are an awful lot of hearings. There is movement. How much and whether it all gets done before the elections or in the lame duck before the adjournment of this two-year Congress, yet to be seen, but it's a thing. Issues of our priority are in far better position today than they were 2 years ago at the end of the last Congress. So we continue to be more involved, frankly, in federal affairs than we have in the past, because there appears to be both some progress as well as some promise of reaching the goal line on several of these things.
Questions for Chris?
I wanted to ask for a little bit more information about the Land and Water Conservation Fund. I understand there'll be an attempt to reauthorize that late this summer.
There is a, I don't know specifically what you're referring to. Is this Mr. Bishop's proposal? Do you know, from Utah?
I don't know.
Chairman of the National Resources
Senator
Committee.
Gardner is
yeah.
pushing for this.
Okay. Well, it has been a perennial effort by several to Director Gray's concerns. Mr. Bishop has had some priorities that aren't universally supported in terms of changing priorities for the fund, for use of the fund. The fund, as I say, it sunset or expired in 2015, but it continues, like the ESA, it continues with annual appropriations. The appropriations have not been the full appropriations, that is, they have not been all of the offshore revenues that go into that fund. Yeah, right. But it is, and that is part of most of the reauthorizations, is to provide for an automatic authorization for all of the funds that flow into that account, and still subject to appropriations. I will look into that. I don't believe, I'm trying to remember, it comes up so often in different venues, statements of priority. Seems like, I think it was at Club 20 when I last asked Senator Gardner the question, and he pledged his commitment to it. Zane?
I understand that Outdoor Industry Association has been working on their mailing. That's the next, the expiration of the current extension is in September.
Right, end of the fiscal year.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Gardner and Bennett would both of us support that extension.
I'll look at it.
Anything else?
Thank you all, and again, thank you for your attendance and your assistance throughout the legislative session.
Thanks, Chris.
All right then, so our last item on the agenda for today is Director's Basin updates. issues? Particular items? Yes, Chandler Henry.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about our watershed basin issues with Lake Christine fire, and to thank Andy and Chris for helping us figure out what values were at risk as far as water resources. There were a lot of questions about that. And also just let people know we have filed a request through USDA, the NRCS, for an emergency watershed plan, something that Eagle County would act as a sponsor. That takes an act of Congress apparently to allocate funds for watershed plan restoration. So it's a 75-25 split with a 25% local match. So the first meeting looking at restoration took place on Monday. We're doing an all lands approach, so everybody who has interest, federal, state, private, is working on it together to come up with this restoration plan. And that just leads me to my third issue, and I was wondering, does the River District have emergency plans in the case of a fire, with office buildings, with reservoirs, with assets, as far as what happens with power outages and with debris flows and that sort of thing?
We do have emergency plans for both our reservoirs and our office. Honestly, it's on my list of things to review with more particularity and update. So I personally haven't done that, but we do have those plans.
Great. It's you don't realize how critical they are and how quickly you need to find them and do them. That's my thing.
Thank you.
And I might mention, actually, I saw you on the small screen during that update, and I watched with my daughter up there, Deputy Sheriff of Pictou County and associated with that. I was very impressed, though, with the response that the county was making.
Well, we crowdsourced the fire. We used Google Hangouts, Google Docs, and social media. And before the last community meeting, we had 80,000 views of the Facebook Live feeds of the community meeting.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. And we connected all of the partners, the watershed folks, the water providers, the towns, the feds, everybody through Google Hangouts. So we had a running thread of everybody having the same information. It worked amazingly well.
It's a tough issue.
Yeah.
You guys did a great job.
Thanks.
And Brent, if you have it.
Yeah, in your packet, you'll see that there's something in there about the River District helping fund some research for the algae that we have on the White River. This year is no different. It's actually a little bit worse than what it has been in the past 2 years. And it started in 2014, but I've been interacting more with landowners and talking with them. I've had the town of Rangeley and other folks in my office pounding their fist on my desk saying, what are you going to do to help? And I'm like, I'm the Water Conservancy guy. They said, no, you're the water guy. Okay, fine, just because I'm networked. But anyway, by talking to these people, the town of Rangeley, they're having to clean their screens several times a day, cleaning hundreds of pounds of this stuff each time. It's impacting their water quality, their ability to divert during the peak of the season when your water usage is extremely high, river is extremely low. Also, their treatment works is being impacted because it takes more treatment to treat the water, more chemicals, things along that nature. So there's an impact on that as well. Irrigation wise, I've talked to several who they cannot actually irrigate without having a crane on site to pull their diversion structure out of the water, clean it several times a day, put it back in, turn the pump back on. They have backwash and filtration systems that are being followed up too, and the irrigation systems are being followed. This starts above Meeker, and it goes all the way to the confluence of the Dream. Recreation, I know in Rangeley, has ceased on the White River. Nobody's fishing it, nobody's tubing it, nobody's swimming in it, nobody's wading in it. Nobody wants to be in it because it's just a floating mass of grass. And above Meeker, I know they're being impacted quite a bit too with their recreation and some of the irrigation diversion structures as well. And I guess I'm encouraging a continued involvement from the River District because we've got real impact happening here. it's impacting financial livelihoods of people. And you're dealing with a community as well that's seen a significant downturn in their economy, and now their expenses are going up, incomes are going down because they can't get the crops. And I talked to one rancher the other day where he said he's just done. He goes, I'm done. I'm shutting my system off. I'm going to make my last cutting. I'm done until it goes away.
Is that temperature?
We don't know. We don't know if it's temperature, if it's nutrients. We're kind of getting it narrowed down. There's several studies out there that are kind of giving some insight as to maybe some direction where to go. But I'm hoping to encourage the River District to have a continued effort. I know there's probably some presentations that probably, as we get data coming in, that might be of interest to this group. I don't know. But it's tough living in an area when you know we're in the midst of building a reservoir too, where you know you're dealing with a water quantity and quality issue, a shrinking reservoir that's passing through more sediment, and now you got this on top of it. It makes life tough. Quality of life is tough in that part of the world where you're looking at water. And when you start impacting that, the trickle down, it affects your life. So, and doggone it, I can't go catfishing. So, and I'm serious, I can't go catfishing in my river. So, anyway, I just wanted to share that with you.
I would just say, Al and I have talked about this, and I unless the board objects, I do hope to bring in, as the studies are refined and some answers are brought in, some presentations. Al was at one, as were several of our engineers by CPW, and I'd like to get some of that information brought into you guys at probably in October at our board meeting to understand a little bit more about what's being looked at and why, and hopefully keep us informed so that we can be part of the solution.
And the whole study that we're doing, we're looking at is about $600,000. So it's not just a little piece of cash here, and we're hoping you can find an outcome. You don't know.
Are there other places in the basin that are experiencing an infestation like this?
There are other places in the basin where algae is becoming more prevalent. It doesn't appear to be the same strand that is in the lake. And that's part of the issue that's going on.
Is this an invasive species that was brought in there by some guy with a bucket full of fish that he wanted to fish later on?
Mike, maybe you can...
I know enough to be a little bit dangerous, but it's Cladophora is the predominant algae. It's Colomensis algae. It is actually native. It's not invasive, but it could be brought in, like you said, to a basin by somebody on fish waders. Any number of other methods could be brought in, birds, etc. You know, there's lots of ways to bring it into a basin, but it is a native type of algae.
Hunter had something to add. Hunter, can you speak up just because it's difficult to get recordings from people?
Yeah, sure. Basically the same thing. I understand from Mindy May with CPW that it is a native species of algae. The USGS is doing a study right now, and they are taking data, so hopefully we'll have a little bit better idea after they get some of this data back.
Right, which is partially what we're funding.
Correct.
Because the USGS doesn't seem to fund anything unless we actually pay for it, based on what I'm saying.
Yeah, you know it.
Now they're kicking in 35, 40%.
And they raised their rates too.
Other comments?
Well, I just thought I'd add more tales of woe for fishing, specifically the Blue, and then the Upper Colorado has been experiencing unprecedented temperatures and the inability for the fish to survive in the middle of the day. And so our outfitters are devastated because they basically don't have the ability to do their business all summer, taking people out on guided fishing trips. On a positive side, Summit County and 3 of our towns put in money to hire 4 U.S. Forest Service seasonals to do patrolling and monitoring for fires and We had one devastating, frightening fire, but I think we would have had another 12 had we not had these people. And our ranger district is functioning on a third of the money that they had 10 years ago. So they just don't have the funds to be able to hire people who used to do this kind of work. So I think for us it was a pretty good deal for $80,000 to get 4 seasonals. And because the Forest Service had housing, but they didn't have funding to pay for them, so these 4 have been out on the ground patrolling, giving out tickets for fires, and I think probably prevented another 12 fires in our county.
And Eagle County will be doing that next year, giving money to the Forest Service to hire front country rangers and going in there. But that's maybe something, Chris, for your information. We're sending a letter, we can copy you, that just talks about Forest Service funding and the necessity of locals to beef that up to protect our forests and watersheds and people.
Dr. Hazard?
Can't you do something with tourism dollars towards that also? Or no?
Anything else, Director Trump?
I thought I'd just kind of give you a brief update of the effect of the drought in the Gunnison Valley. We've got ranchers cutting hay in June, which is unheard of. 50% crop if they're lucky. Some of us on the Gunnison are going to continue to try to grow a crop. Rafting companies planning on shutting down in the middle of August. Lack of flow, even in rivers where we have reservoir releases. So there's other places that it's hurting financially as well. Now, it's difficult. I think we're experiencing the effects of growth and the redistribution of the natural resource. And it's going to be an interesting time as we move forward in the next 10, 15, 20 years. What's going to happen with the state of Colorado and our natural resources.
Dr. Fresco.
Our local newspaper, which is somewhat of a regional newspaper, has put in a lot of time and energy in covering drought issues. They've actually done a pretty fair job. They're covering both interstate and intrastate issues. They quote folks from the River District. They actually dig into these pretty good. Although the main reporter that does such a good job is retiring. So I hope they find a way to continue, but it's good they're doing that, because what I see happening this year for both domestic water users and agricultural water users, very few folks have been impacted in very small ways only.
Say again?
From the drought, I think water providers are doing a heck of a job of keeping up and maintaining the status quo, meeting people's water needs, both domestic and agricultural. So most people are not really feeling the impacts in Mesa County.
In Mesa County
drought.
Yep,
correct.
And that was the problem we had when we went to a Tabor compliance election back in 2004, I think it was, that the water managers around the western Colorado had done too good of a job of getting through the 2002 drought. And people weren't, by and large, the most folks who lived in the municipalities were not inconvenienced in western Colorado.
All the years of preparation, to improve water storage, water transmission, to create cooperative relationships within the water community, they've really paid off. And so they've cushioned folks against feeling a lot of negative effects of the drought to this point. But one more dry winter and that's all going to change. The domestic water users in our valley have made it clear that if next winter is as dry or drier than the previous, they will be instituting water regulations, new regulations. And I don't think they've settled on what that means, but it could mean increased costs for water, higher charges to as an incentive to implement more conservation. It could mean rationing. It could mean curtailing landscape use with domestic water. They'll be working on that this winter, you know, based on the snowpack reports as we know them. But I think next year we're in a position where a lot of folks could have a rude awakening real fast. And, you know, they'll want some answers. And they'll want to know what community leaders are going to do about it. So I think the district, you know, can play a helpful role in explaining the history of this drought, the ongoing dialogue with other basin water users, other states, and try to add some clarity to it.
It certainly varies location to location, the immediacy and the impact of the drought. Delta County, for example, is seeing severe effects, but again, in certain locations and others not so much. In the Barbary Valley water user system is doing moderately well. No one's going to be dancing in the street or celebrating, but it's doing a fairly good job delivering 80% or more, whereas the south slope of Grand Mesa is at about 30 to 50%. 30% of irrigation water right is not enough to keep the crops. 50% we're surviving, but it's close. So it seems to vary quite a bit, just depending on your water source.
Yeah, the vast majority of our irrigation water is coming out of the Colorado River.
Yeah.
And they're
in higher elevation.
The most senior, right.
Any other comments?
I've got some. You know, the Uncompahgre Valley water users are doing a good job. I think we're running at about 70%, which every time they go down 10%, it adds probably 4 hours a day to changing water and doing those kind of things. Some relief will come from, you know, cutting some corn, because the Olathe sweet corn harvest is about 2 weeks early. So you get that ground back. You don't get it back in the system, but you get it back on your own farm, where you don't have to irrigate that field. It leaves a little more for the next fields around in your place. Some grain's getting harvested, but it's a great gamble. If we don't get the snow, and if we don't get the monsoons, and we don't get a wet fall, I'm not sure what will happen. But I wanted to mention quickly that at the divide break there at Dallas Divide, going on into the southwest region of the state of Colorado, my representative district, it is much worse. I mean, it is incredibly bad. Dove Creek in that country, tens of thousands of acres, no harvest whatsoever. You know, beans came up, 2-leafed, you can roll them and they died right there, and they're still black standing there dead. Wheat 3 inches tall, zeroed out is what they kept telling me while I was down there. Montezuma County, you know, they're cutting down to, I think, about 16 inches per acre. You know, guys are hanging on. Norwood in that district, same thing. In fact, they may run out of domestic water. So, you know, 02 was bad. I was there. And this one's worse. And it's worse in different ways. So, you know, I hope, you know, and I don't blame any irrigation manager or any water manager to use the stored water he had this year. But go, man, if it doesn't come back. You know, I have a county down there, Dolores County, that's probably a complete wipeout. I'm on my way to see the governor this week. But that's just the first county. because we'll all be in that shape next year if we've been depending on irrigation water. So, you know, it's, we talk about outside the box, you know, some of those conversations were there. We're right at the edge of that box, and you know, the feeling that you get from those people that are just zeroed out is incredible. So, luckily there is some water in the Colorado River Basin. And, you know, I think the people in the Colorado River Basin take the best care of water of anybody in the state of Colorado. Because we usually have some. Down in that southwest corner there. Anyway, that's all I've got. Thanks.
Anybody else? I think we're only slightly past 4. Probably will live for another day then. So we're going to recess until tomorrow and reconvene back here at 6. Lori, what time are we?
Sorry, 6.
Morning. Yes. No, in the morning. I was talking about tonight.
Oh,
Yeah, we changed the agenda, Lori.
The event begins at 6. If you'd like to show up a few minutes ahead of time, that would be great. The last count, I understand from Meredith, with the board and staff, we have over 120 people coming. So you will be hosting a large group. There is no breakfast here tomorrow. Eat at the hotel or Dave Barrett's house.
Yeah. But no bacon, only oatmeal, no bacon.